O Teju vai falar por um certo tempo e depois a gente vai abrir também um pouco para a conversa da plateia. Se vocês tiverem perguntas, vão anotando na cabeça.
I apologize, I can't speak Portuguese. Does everybody have their headsets if you need them? Who understands English? Okay, we're going to manage. And then if you don't, you have headsets. Also, this is quite a lovely turnout. There's a lot of people in here, so I feel a bit shy. So the hat stays on. Sorry. It just helps me. All right. Great. It's a real pleasure to be back in Sao Paulo, a city that I feel very much at home in. So I'm very grateful for the invitation from IMS to come talk here. Especially grateful to Tiago Nogueira and Joanna Rice-Fernandez, who made everything possible, and their amazing team brought me over from New York City to be here. Thank you. I'm very moved that so many of my Sao Paulo friends are also in the audience today, so it's nice to see you all again. As advertised, I'm supposed to be talking about Luigi Ghiri, the Italian photographer, and I will, but I'm also going to talk about another photographer, the late French photographer René Bury, who does not really have much of a connection with Luigi Ghiri. The only real connection they have is me. I'm talking about them. So I'm connecting them. So this is sort of going to be in two parts. The René Bury part is quite short. And I'm just going to read something I wrote about him. And then the Luigi Ghiri part, I'm not going to read. I'm just going to, it's going to be a high wire act of me interpreting the pictures without any notes. So let's see how that goes. All right. How's everybody doing? Good? Tudo bem? Okay. All right. So, are they gangsters? Are they bankers? There are certain photographs that seem to have been pulled out of the world of dreams. Men on a rooftop by the Swiss photographer René Bury is one such picture. The photograph, taken in Sao Paulo in 1960, shows four men on a rooftop, seen from the vantage point of an even higher building. Far below them, stark in black and white, are tram lines and cars, and tiny pedestrians so perfectly matched with their long shadows that they look like miniaturized sculptures by Giacometti. I'm not sure when my interest in men on a rooftop became an obsession. Through the years, it gained a hold on my imagination until it came to stand as one of the handful of pictures that truly convey the oniric possibilities of street photography. Abbas, who is also in Magnum, described Men on a Rooftop as vintage René, superb form, no political or social dimension. Abbas zeroes in on the formal perfection of the image, but I'm not so sure that I agree that it lacks a social dimension. To me, it literally portrays the levels of social stratification and the enormous gap between those above and those below. A great photo comes about through a combination of readiness, chance, and mystery. Gabriel Garcia Marquez once asked whom the best reader of 100 Years of Solitude was, responded with a story as follows. A Russian friend met a lady, a very old lady, who was copying the whole book out by hand right to the last line. My friend asked her why she was doing it, and the lady replied, because I want to find out who is really mad, the author or me, and the only way to find out is to rewrite the book. Garcia Marquez said, "I find it hard to imagine a better reader than that lady." And like that lady in Garcia Marquez's story, I thought some act of repetition would clarify things. And so in the March of 2015, I went to Sao Paulo. I came to Sao Paulo to look for René Bury. I was there once before, 3 years earlier, and I had been impressed by the city's thrumming energy, especially along the stateliest of its avenues, the one we're on, the Avenida Paulista. This was not the cliched Brazil of soccer, sand, and samba. From a height in any central district of Sao Paulo, what you see is an incessancy of high-rises, as though someone had invented the high-rise and then forgotten to stop. This city of work and hard edges, I found, was the Brazil I preferred. And I somehow convinced myself that Bury's photograph, so keen in its evocation of capital, must have been taken on Avenida Paulista. Shortly after arriving in the city, I went to visit a friend, the curator Thiago Nogueira, in his beautiful corner office on the 14th floor of a building on Paulista. There were great views of the avenue, but in neither direction could I see a correspondence with any aspect of Bury's picture. Where were the 4 silvery tram tracks glinting in the slanting sun? What about the steep canyon created by the tall buildings facing one another? And I couldn't find any building that matched the one on which the men were walking. Thiago began to mention other major roads in the city. Perhaps I wanted Rua da Consolação or Avenida da Liberdade. Or was Bury's view from the Martinelli building? As he threw out names, it dawned on me that I was lost. I had come all this way, and all I had was a city, a year, a photographer's name. In Magnum's New York office, there's a library print of men on a rooftop. On the reverse of the picture are stamps and scribbles. Bury's name, the words Brazil and businessmen, which doesn't clarify whether they're bankers or gangsters, and several 5-digit numbers in different hands. It was a lovely artifact, but it told me nothing about exactly where in the city the picture had been made. Nor did an interview Bury gave late in life, in which he simply said, "Whenever there was a high-rise building, I was climbing up and knocked on the door and said, 'Can I take a picture?' Sao Paulo is full of high-rises, and they all have doors. I tried a few. The view from the roof of the Signor's 38th floor Oscar Niemeyer-designed Copan building yielded no clues. The restaurant near the top of the 46th floor Edificio Italia offered a thrilling panorama, but I saw nothing that related to Bury's photograph. There had been a terrible drought at the beginning of that year, but it was finally raining in Sao Paulo. I sat in my hotel room brooding. During a brief lull in the downpour, a woman dressed in black and wearing high heels walked across the roof of the building across the street, smoking a cigarette. 4 days into my trip, Thiago emailed with news. A friend of his thought that Bury's picture was made from the top of a building that once belonged to the Bank of the State of Sao Paulo. That building, still informally called the Banespal, was completed in 1947 and was for a while the tallest in Brazil. I went up with a small group of tourists. It was mid-morning, the rain had stopped. We were limited to 5 minutes. From the viewing platform, 36 floors above the sprawling city, the vista was bright. That's a photo I took. I took photos in all directions and realized with a sinking feeling that I was again in the wrong place. Then the 5 minutes were up and our small group had to descend. A dead end. I wrote to thank Thiago anyway, and I asked other friends in the city, Ana Paula, Joana, Andres, about the picture, but few of them knew it, and the search had begun to take on some of the dream logic of the photograph itself. I was frustrated, but also vaguely amused, as though I was suspended in the first half of an uncompleted joke. I asked the concierge. I asked the taxi drivers who took me around. None of them could recognize the photograph. It seemed that I would leave Sao Paulo empty-handed. In any case, the city had grown so fast and so quickly, perhaps the building the men walked on, or the one from which Buri took his picture, had been altered or demolished. Then Tiago wrote back. His friend, he said, insisted that it had to be the Banespao. It could be no other. But I'd seen the view with my own eyes. I'd photographed it. What had I missed? It was a Friday, the day before the end of my vacation. And that was when I remembered a curious story that Buri told about the photograph. In those days, according to Buri, Henri Cartier-Bresson, the founder of Magnum Photos, limited his fellow photographers to lenses from 35 millimeters to 90 millimeters. Buri had surreptitiously gone longer while shooting in Sao Paulo to 180 millimeters. I never told him, he said. At that point, I broke loose of my mentor. When you shoot at such an extended focal length, there's a great deal more compression between the middle and the far distances. The canyons created by Sao Paulo's high-rises seem even more vertiginous. The angle of view is also severely narrowed, cutting out much of what the eyes see on the periphery of vision. Perhaps using the wrong lens was getting in my way. I'd only brought a 50 millimeter lens with me. I now borrowed a longer lens from Tiago. It was only 85 millimeters, not ideal, but closer. Then I got in a taxi and went back to the Banespao. It was late afternoon, and by now, the rains were torrential. The city was a gray blur. The buildings shone with wet. The time limit at the top of the building was the same as before, 5 minutes, and in the open-air viewing platform, I got drenched. I set my eye to the camera's viewfinder and looked northwest. Suddenly, everything clicked into place, as in the final moves of a jigsaw. I saw Buri's view. To the right was the building the men had walked on. How could I have missed it before? It was that building I later discovered, the Edifício do Banco do Brasil. What I hadn't seen in Buri's photo was that the roof the men were walking on was not the building's summit. The building had a stacked design, and a further set of floors rose just out of shot. To my left and far below, meanwhile, was Avenida São João, slightly changed from 1960. The tram lines were gone, but certainly recognizable in its rain-slicked state. The avenue was full of cars, buses, and pedestrians. The rain kept coming down, and my 5 minutes were up. But the mission had been accomplished. The photograph isn't what was photographed. It's something else, Gary Winogrand once said. It's about transformation. The photographic image is a fiction created by a combination of lenses, cameras, film, pixels, color or its absence, time of day, season. When I'm moved by something, I want to literally put myself in its place, the better to understand what was transformed. This interests me as a writer and as a photographer. How do raw materials become something else, something worth keeping? Those four guys just came from nowhere and went nowhere, Buri said, of the men in his photograph. The photograph he made of them came from nowhere and went everywhere. My seeing his point of view and taking a picture from the same spot 55 years later did not solve the mystery. But in discovering all that can be known about a work of art, what cannot be known is honored even more. We come right up to the edge and can go no further. All right, so that's my Sao Paulo story. Thank you. And now for the scary part, no notes. Has anybody here heard the name of Luigi Ghiri? Yeah, wonderful photographer. So a few of you know him and many don't. Just gonna get some water if that's okay. I'll never have a better audience than this for this question. So if one of the four men on the roof, you know, is your uncle, your dad, that would be amazing. I would write another column about it. It would be incredible. So if you know who, no, but seriously, if you know who these guys are. Luigi Ghiri was born in Scandiano in 1943, and he died in 1992 at the age of 49, too young. I discovered him only a few years ago. Pretty much his entire life was lived in Emilia-Romagna in northern Italy, the region of the country that is centered on the city of Reggio Emilia, and then cities like nearby Modena, Bologna, industrial northern Italy. This was the first photo of his I saw. And what I'm going to try to do, I have a whole bunch of his pictures I want to show. And the way I want to approach this is just think about each one, what makes it Ghiri. And then I'll show one of two other things by other artists, people from well before him, and then people who came after. People he was influenced by, and then people whom he influenced. And just think a little bit about what makes their work Ghiri-esque. Avant la lettre, and then in terms of influence. Salzburg, 1977. I remember I saw it, and I saw it a few years ago, and it just bothered me, you know? It just got stuck inside my head. And now I got a postcard of it, and I stuck it on my fridge, and it's been there ever since. I see it every day. Because, you know, at first glance, it's four women looking at a landscape, except they're not looking at a landscape, they're looking at a mural, a poster of a landscape. And you can tell it's a poster because there's labels on it in the Austrian Alps. Or the coloring of the women is so close to that of the poster that maybe the women are a painting. Okay, so now this confusion has started to happen. And by the time I show the next image, you start to get a sense of what this guy is up to, which is a certain optical tension between reality and simulacra of reality, the image of reality. This is a photograph he made in Rimini in 1977. And in Rimini, there's a tourist attraction like Italy in miniature. Okay, so it's one of those sort of those terrible places that families go to. Let's go tour the country by going to an amusement park, you know. And there's a model of the Pantheon, there's a model of, you know, St. Peter's and that sort of thing. And this is like a model of the Italian Alps. And Ghiri has gone behind the model and taken a picture of the model, right? And so what makes it Ghiri-esque is that he has slightly opened up the magic behind the artifice. But another Ghiri-esque thing about it, what makes it one of his pictures, is that when we first look at it, we're not completely sure the scale of what we're looking at. Okay, we think it's probably a model, but we don't know if it's a tiny one or a very large one. So there's this derangement of scale. So what I'm going to try to show with each of these pictures, maybe just say something about it that for me makes it work as one of his pictures, because it's all these factors collectively that gave him such a powerful voice and made him such an influential figure. From a book he published in the late 70s, the introduction, that book was called Kodachrome, and it was like his first body of work between 1970 and 1978. This is the introduction. In 1969, a photograph taken from a spaceship traveling to the moon appeared on every newspaper. This was the first photograph of the entire world. And you can see why that would interest him, right? It's the world. When you put the world in a photo, you turn the world into a miniature. right? You turn it into something that can be seen all at once. I don't think God intended us to see the world all at once. Okay, so now you see it all at once, and it gives you a weird feeling of power and vulnerability, but also sort of confusion. It turned the world into a toy in a way. Two biographical facts about Luigi Ghiri that would make sort of his approach to photography kind of make sense. One is that he studied geometry in college. So he, looking at things in almost like a Cartesian kind of way, mathematical sort of way. And his pictures are not full of obvious emotion, you know. It's not sort of this heart-jolting moment that you get with Rainer Buri's picture. Sort of very lyrical, very romantic, the kind of picture that a man on the street would see and say, oh, that's a fantastic picture. In Ghiri, something cooler is happening. And the other thing is that up till 1974, he worked as a surveyor in Modena. And he would take photos on family snaps, on family vacations. And after a while, he started to notice that he took the ordinary photos that everybody took, you know, like the wife, the friends. But then he saw that there were other photos he was taking that were expressing some other energy. The introduction to Kodachrome continues as follows. The image that man had pursued for centuries was presented for our view. It held within it all previous, incomplete images, all books that had been written, all signs, those that had been deciphered, and those that had not. Typo. This is the picture he's talking about. The event happens in 68, in 69 it's in the papers, right? And it just kind of, what does it mean to be looking at this now? Because Ghiri's insight was to understand that when you look at a picture of the world, you're actually looking at a picture of every picture in existence, if only you could zoom in close enough. This picture contains every picture that existed in the world in 1968. It was not only the image of the entire world, but the only image that contained all other images of the world. Graffiti, frescoes, paintings, writings, photographs, books, films. It was at once the representation of the world and all the representations of the world. Now, it's a little bit conceptual, but Ghiri's first real serious photographic practice was working with a circle of conceptual artists in Modena, where he was living and working at the time, and making photographs of their work. And so he was already used to thinking about photography from a little bit of a distance like that. Okay. And now this concern with maps. What makes this a picture by Ghiri? This is from a classroom in a building designed by the Italian architect Aldo Rossi. The map, right away, right? It takes us into that space of formal learning, and the map becomes a map of Italy inside a classroom that is inside Italy. And it's just those, they're not quite visual puns. It's not like they're super easy like that. But they set up a feeling of, when you look at his pictures, your first sensation is that something double is happening, but then you have to figure out what it is. Or like in this one, his wife, Paola, while they were on vacation in Capri. Okay, so you're stepping on a tile that has a map of Capri while in Capri, right? You're both in Capri and on Capri. There's almost like a language game going on. What makes this Ghiri, there's no tricks in it. It's not a model. You know, it's the actual Colosseum in Rome. But two things make it Ghiri. One is that it is such an unusual and crisp point of view that you start suspecting that it's a movie set. And so early on he had the insight that because we live in a world of appearances, even the real thing starts to look like an appearance of itself. And he was able to sort of explore that tension, that fragility of reality with his photography. And the other thing that makes it Giri is that man, almost like a little figure, little doll, turned away from us. So the figure turned away from us. In photojournalism, the figure tends to be turned towards us, expressing an emotion. When a figure is turned away from us, not only is that figure unreadable, but now we also get the sensation that the figure is reading what we're seeing. And so it establishes within the picture frame the fact of spectatorship. Okay, so this is one of his very early photos. This is maybe from 73, early on. And this was when he was documenting other people's work. So this is a work by Franco Guerzoni, whose work was involved with ruins and things like that, and making painted surfaces and intervening on ruined buildings at that time. So that's where Giri started. And I think at some point he started to notice the tensions present even in things that were not intervened with. In other words, he's recording this for Guerzoni because of the image on the right, but the image on the left, even by itself, already is suggesting a kind of painterliness. Well, what makes this Giri? They turned away, that's one. Then Rome, two tourists. He's interested in tourism because tourism, advertising, the cliches that surround us, okay? So he is not looking as a tourist, he is looking at the way that tourists look. And very often he's including tourists in his images. Not like Martin Parr, not making fun of them, not saying they're foolish, but almost like saying that they become part of what one goes to see in a way. Sometimes, there's a kind of sort of gentle humor also, like these ladies' hats also look like the cupola of St. Peter's. So there's a rhyming kind of thing, two little old ladies in white hats. Or maybe they're young ladies, I don't know. I don't know. I think they're old ladies. The other Giri-esque thing is that the film work that he favored very much tended towards a pale color, a pale affect. And you'll see that time and time and again. And it definitely puts him in contrast with his, for example, his American contemporaries, color pioneers, like Stephen Shore and William Eggleston, who used livid greens and angry reds. Giri feels like a dream. It's funny, right? So this is also in Rimini. People are walking among these things. And without those people there, you would think, okay, it's a strange helicopter view, and then you notice the flowers, and then the people, you're like, what's going on? What's going on? And then you get even more confused. Are the clouds real? Are they painted? Very Giri. And this is not a model at all. And so he would sometimes do the opposite. Play with this binary between the telescope and the binoculars. Rather between the telescope and the microscope. Looking at something small, making it big, looking at something far, bringing it close. So this is just a group of people inside a theater. But taken from such a far distance, at such an angle, and caught in a moment of stillness, so that they look almost like mannequins in a dollhouse. His work just had such a powerful and clear voice that I wanted to see every picture he had done. I just was collecting books by him. He wasn't particularly well known, let's say in 2013-14. Even at that point in the English-speaking world, maybe there had been one book that was out. So I was collecting all these books in Italian, but already the Italians appreciated him, so forget about first editions. They were super expensive, but they were reprints of things. This is Parma, a hat shop. What makes this Giri? The fact that the real hats, they almost look like they've been painted on glass, but also this idea of attitude, but in the absence of humans. The hats have an attitude, but then it makes you sort of think of mannequins or decapitation in some funny kind of way. It's like a crowd of people without the people. Every part of the landscape, from the roofs of houses to signs on walls, seems to await recognition via his loving eye. And that's a line that Geary wrote about Walker Evans. But these are lines that very much apply to Geary as well. Because he's not waiting, unlike Cartier-Bresson, for example, for the decisive moment. He is waiting, he is seeking to uncover what is already latent in the scene. He's not looking for drama in the scene, he's looking to uncover the poignancy that is already sort of there in the scene. What makes it Geary? The word mare in front of, the word for sea in front of the sea. Double. A little ship down there, and then the M is kind of bent a little bit. And then you know it's not just flat, it's reality, you know? And there's this sort of proscenium, almost like there's a balcony between you and the sea. The sea and then the sea. Another thing he wrote, in some photographs we can make out the building blocks of fables, the supporting framework and scaffolding which props up this land. And yet, rather than exposing the tricks or taking away the magic, they contribute to the illusion. In other words, just being able to say, ah, I see what he did there, doesn't stop the picture from being lovely. In fact, it somehow enriches it, because then you're fascinated by his eye, and you wonder what it means to go around seeing the world in that way. In that sense, it reminds me very much of somebody with whom he certainly felt a kinship, another creative Northern European, Italo Calvino, whose work similarly dealt with the globe and fables and miniatures and giants and impossible things, but that were narrated as if they were absolutely possible. And recursion, you know, when things layer upon themselves, when things are recursive. Very much a Calvino trait, very much a Geary trait. This is a mirror of somebody in a gym. He's funny sometimes. And sometimes, even when he's not funny, it's there, the there is there. This was a series of work he did in the late 80s, making pictures in the atelier of Giorgio Morandi, the great Italian painter who had already died long before, in 1964, I think. But, I mean, this is Morandi's work. This is Morandi's painting. Geary is not necessarily saying, I'm trying to do something completely new. He's saying, I recognize this, I'm in this. So he goes to the studio, it was preserved exactly as it was for decades, and he took these images there. But he gives, just like Morandi did, he gives these commonplace objects a kind of dignity where, well, you know it's a water pitcher and it's these jars, but again, you're not too sure. What is the scale? How big is, how small, you know? They seem to have a kind of luminosity and pride that, in fact, connects them to the old European tradition of still life painting. You know, a fragment of writing he made up to awaken the inanimate world through light. So, I mean, you could say he's conceptual in a way, but he's also deeply concerned with beauty. So this is simply a very beautiful photograph of books in a library or in a shop. But at the same time, he's appealing to classic Geary subjects. Knowledge, the natural world, the sense of the encyclopedia. You know, how do we know what we see? You know, it's not a picture of a bird, it's a photograph of a painting of a bird, it's a photograph of a painting of a peach. but these are not images of books. What he has photographed is not images of books, he's photographed the actual books. But the paper, the bird, everything is then an index, is pointing at everything. I think a sense for him of the miracle of calm creation was also what led him to have an affinity for the work of Aldo Rossi, whose studio he painted many times. Right, so I've photographed it. It's an interesting slip of the tongue. He didn't paint it, but he photographs with a painterly eye, you know. And so he goes into this studio. It's full of light, and he sees these lovely pastel colors, and these pastels really appeal to him. Giri is the mirror there. Giri is the painting leaned against the wall. Giri is the rolled up plans and paintings that contain knowledge the way that a globe of the world contains information. You know, Giri is a stack of books that, like his pictures, when you open them, there's layers to them. When you open the book, there's more going on. And in fact, for me, Giri is also the wall, which is closely attended to and already starts to suggest a map. One of his very first projects, called Atlases, was him simply just doing very close-up pictures of details from atlases that he had at home. Like, I mean, really, really close up. Like, so that you had a few dots crossing a meridian, you know. So, and I see that everywhere in his work. And then the idea of the day trip, the journey, not far from home. He did go to places like France and Netherlands, Switzerland often, but largely his work actually happened in northern Italy, and almost the vast majority of it was in Emilia-Romagna, or places in Italy that were quite close. Emilia-Romagna, which is flat. And this idea, again, remember, this is somebody who studied geometry, you know. And sometimes maybe our idea of sophisticated photography is not that you stand in the middle of the road and then you get the horizon line, you know, the converging road. It's like that. You ever remember being like 6 or 7 years old when you realized that you could draw a road by doing two lines that converge at a point, and you thought it was the coolest discovery? That discovery never stopped being cool for him, right? Like this road made in Chianti. But then what it gives is a certain astonishing lucidity, a clarity. We've all seen this, but we have not taken this picture. And it just, for him, becomes a kind of new map of Italy that is not only about monuments, antiquity, or about disenchanted modernity, but simply about the simplicity of the child who is in the schoolroom for the first time and realizes that if you follow the road, it actually does not end, but if you look at the road, it looks like it comes to a point on the horizon. What makes it Giri? I guess the visual pun of the geometric instrument and the print. What makes this Giri? Well, I feel the presence of glass, the simplicity, a little bit of defamiliarization. They just opened doors, but now he has almost turned it into a grid, which is part of what makes him attracted to the architecture of Aldo Rossi. This is a cemetery by Aldo Rossi outside Bologna, photographed in the snow with such understated simplicity that it becomes almost like a print or a Japanese watercolor. Giri loved the sea. He worked as a surveyor earlier. Then he was a teacher, he was a professor, but then he also did quite a bit of commercial shooting. And he was always seeking to subvert that language of commercial photography. in commercial photography where they would just take the subject and put it dead center, you know. Except in his case, what he put dead center was sometimes almost nothing. But he's like, here it is. Here's the view of the sea. You know, here's the pole at the corner of a cabana. You know, here's the beach. A very early one, but the incorporating the language of advertising literally into his work. Modern life in that sense. We're not going to escape all this signage and all this stuff. There's no point trying to be nostalgic. Put it right there, like that. Or to make an image of Venice that not only looks like, again, a miniature Venice, but that is a Venice that does not look like Canaletto, that is not bright and full of people and festive, but a Venice that looks like a Venice that has been mediated by movies. Okay, so always this sense of mediation. And then you spend so much time in his world that you start wondering whether you are imagining things, right? So this is actually a real church in Emilia-Romagna. It's the facade of the church. He's done it so flat. It's not a model of a church. It's almost as if now he has tutored our sensibility that even when I see this, which is just a facade of a church, straight like this, I feel that it is Ghiri-esque. It's also true that later in his career, he got more interested in doing nocturnal scenes and night scenes. The early pictures were much brighter. A key element in this work, something I repeated already, was perhaps the fondness I've always had for places and objects that seem to contain everything: encyclopedias, museums, maps. Okay, so not to take knowledge for granted, but to proffer this perpetual inquiry. How do we know what we know? What systems of knowledge are being handed down to us? It's always, knowledge is always systematized and codified, but it's actually never complete. It only ever pretends to be complete. So this is something he has a game with, you know. This is a gesture that those of you who know the history of photography have seen. This is the Lake Prags in the Tyrol. It's a gesture that's been done by Robert Frank, by Lee Friedlander, by Walker Evans, by Stephen Shore. You can't resist it, right? Because once you've seen the view, now you see this place where the view is presented in multiplicate, and that itself is also a view. But few of them did it in color, right? So it also inflects it. And meanwhile, this is also Tyrolean, but elsewhere in Riva di Turris. What makes it Ghiri is that clean line, that contrail, like a line drawn in chalk against that blue. And then we just see these segments of these mountains. It's almost like he was looking for the pure forms. You know, those architects who want to reduce. You know, I mean, people like Aldo Rossi, but also people like, at my age, I should not try to be remembering things on stage, but you know who I'm talking about. No, you don't. But, you know, they're artists, they're architects who really go back to the triangle and the sphere and the rectangle. Very, very simple. I think he always had an attraction for that. One of his strangest pictures, this was a commission. It's actually a photograph. It's definitely not a model of Versailles. But he has filled it with so much light. He has done it from such a strange vantage point. And it was asked by Versailles to come and shoot it. So it was a commission. That it really becomes a pure dreamscape. Okay. the photographer participates actively in the creation of reality. Far from some simple, you point your camera at the world and you just catch what is there. Through intentionality, through positioning, it's a game of inches, right? How much lucency you let in, what kind of film you use, you participate and you create a new reality. And this is very much his own eye. And in that sense, photography becomes an active, a practice as painting ever could be. I think a lot of Ghiri's light is indebted to Italian painting. And for me, maybe the two most notable might be Piero della Francesca, who has a very geometric approach. You can see here, Piero was like almost like the mathematician priest among the 15th century painters in this flagellation. Or Fra Angelico. The lucency, the pastel colors, the setting within architecture, the equal weight given to all elements, and even a relative distrust of deep shadow. No need to hide any of it, just have it there, you know, unless the shadow is completely inherent in the scene. But closer, from the mid-30s, Walker Evans was a huge influence, you know, bringing in vernacular signage, language, the thing, the advertising, watermelons, but also fish. But the watermelons are real, but the fish are painted. And Walker Evans, I mean, he really pushed this language very far, because what you're looking at is the glass in front of a photography studio full of photos that have been taken there, and then the signage that says studio. And Walker Evans realizes that this could be a very intense and intellectually productive approach to photography. So he was a big influence on Ghiri. And I feel something of the metaphysical school from the beginning of the 20th century in his work, especially somebody like De Chirico. Ghiri is frequently surreal. He's not a surrealist, because for me, surrealists are often arranging things and, you know, like, and to be frank, I think that people like, I told you, my memory is shit. Salvador Dali kind of bores me, you know, it's like, I'm a surrealist. I'm going to do another weird thing, and it's like, you know, you're just a hyperactive child. Because the true surrealism proceeds by suggestion, right? It's an uneasiness. So I have arrived in the middle of the day in a city I do not know. There's a red tower, and I can just see a statue over there. Why should this bother me? But it bothers, and it's 1913, so it becomes a kind of prophecy as well. So that's a little section on his influences. I mean, this is Ghiri. Again, they look like little figures inside a snow globe, and not like real people. But I see something in here that is connected to the work of Saul Leiter, and I don't know if they were. They have no idea that they're about to be inundated by this wave. But what really makes it for me is the sign, the menu. You know, spaghetti, risotto, insalata. You know, and so that you have the people, you have the mural, and then you have the words. And then you have their collective boredom, you know, and it's like, I don't know if the marriage is going to last, but anyway, the moment has been captured. Bologna, 1973. It's done. And it's, of course, it was such a productive thing, this idea of, are we in a restaurant or are we on the sea, or is it both? He keeps returning to it. I don't think he was very fond, particularly big fan of doing portraits or showing people's faces. He would show the faces of advertising figures, but of actual people, it was almost too much. It would have, and I know this as a landscape photographer myself, the moment you have a human figure in it, you have to know what you're doing, because the human figure will activate the space. And force into the frame a kind of narrative that might be other than what you want. So this is more typically him. Very lucid, very straightforward, inside one of the palazzi in Mantova. This is vintage Ghiri. A mirror on a wall by the sea. And all you get is a reflection of that woman's arm. Or a view of the sea itself, Capri. But those rocks look like stage sets. They really do not look like real rocks at all. And the railing looks like a line drawing. Or a nighttime view, I'm not sure where this is. Matera, maybe, I don't know. But even the blackness of the sea beyond looks not so much like shadow, but more like photo collage. Like somebody has cut out black paper and stuck it on there. So he's often playing with collage effects. And then later on, in the late 80s, a lot of nocturnal shots near home for the dreamlike, movie set-like atmosphere that is probably not too far away from the kinds of effects that Gregory Crewdson seeks to achieve in his work. Okay, there in Bologna, gas station. I mean, what makes this for me is the open bonnet of the car, but also the unearthly purple light over there. So it's not lacking in emotion, but it's a very kind of thoughtful kind of emotion. Getting near the end. It's a fantastic picture. Because that paper is ripped exactly in a way that makes you think of a wave. So it's a poster he's taken a picture of, or something tacked up to a board. It's almost like there's a ship sinking in sand. Like what's going on? But it's a weirdly satisfying picture, isn't it? It's just, that's just Ghiri. Like, it's just, he sees something in the world and it works for him. Photographer I love very much, contemporary still working, also Northern Italian, who was good friends with Ghiri. And I think, well, I think there's an influence. He's definitely doing his own thing. This is Guido Guidi. And Guidi's work is not as conceptually pressured, and yet this feeling for peripheries and for the overlooked and for the disregarded is very much present. This is also Guido Guidi. And this bisection for me feels like the kind of thing that Ghiri might do. But Guido Guidi very frequently is shooting with medium format, large format, really pictures of almost nothing sometimes, very thick photographic description. So he is a master in his own right. And yet, that general concept of a new map of Italy, what does the Italian landscape look like in a new way? Again, Guido Guidi. Someone I certainly know was influenced by Luigi Ghiri is this person. This is Thomas Demand, the German artist and photographer. This is a photograph. It's called Drafting Room, but it's not an actual drafting room. It's a model made of paper and then photographed, and then the model was destroyed. So it's based on a photograph of a real place. He constructed the model in paper and cardboard. He lit it from the side, made it as real as possible, photographed it. But this shimmering divide between what's real and what's not real, what's a photograph, what's a model, and all of that, I think Demand definitely gained a lot from Ghiri, and I know he's a big fan. This is also somebody else influenced by Luigi Ghiri. This is me. This is me, and this is you. Sao Paulo. And for me, Ghiri as a helpful way of, some of my pictures look like They come from his universe, and some do not. But it's a helpful way of looking at what does it mean to be a tourist in Sao Paulo. And I go up on a high building and I take a picture. What kind of work am I trying to do there? I'm not a photojournalist. I'm not trying to be Rene Buri. What I want is the sense of incessancy, repetition, almost like Lego, you know. I'm shooting this with film, with portrait, which gives me a certain lucidity that I like. But for me, what makes it my work is that my photography work is, when I exhibit it, when I publish, is usually in the context of what I have written about it. And that is how I extend that language. So an image I made in Zurich. And then I use the text not to clarify the image, but to further complicate what the image might be doing. Another one from Sao Paulo. This is my book, Blind Spot. I think I should publish that book in Brazil. I think I should. Would you buy it? Okay. All right. I'm going to get signatures from all of you, and then I'll give it to my publisher. And I must have been thinking a lot about him while I was here, because these are all very Guri-esque photos. Probably my most Guri-esque photo, though, is one that I took in northern Italy, in Ferrara. And I'm going to try to read what I have written there. Ferrara. Only later did I see what was at stake. I had assumed that the image was merely saying something about the unsteady boundary between the real and the painted. The mural was a window out into the cityscape. Not until a year later, on closer study, did I understand that the real doubling was elsewhere. But as obvious as it was, I didn't see it until I saw it. The way the table on the left announced a phantom cityscape of its own, an homage to the old city of Ferrara, grouped glasses for towers, porcelain houses, to the mimetic extent of the plastic water bottle campanile. So that's what I ended up discovering, that everything over there is echoing everything up there. So that's why I love Giri, because I would not have made this picture if he wasn't in my head. And then very late on in his career, around the early 90s, he dies of a heart attack at the age of 92, just at the moment, at the age of 49 in 1992, when he's just bought this house in Roncochesi, not too far away from where he has always lived. A nice country house, settling in it, and he gets to live in it for just 2 years. But he takes a lot of nocturnal pictures, but he also takes a lot of pictures of that region in the fog. Very simple pictures that seem to be suggesting a kind of infinity. Just a gate. This is one of the very last images that he made. And I'm just going to leave you with this quotation. The meaning that I'm trying to render through my work is a verification of how it is still possible to desire and face a path of knowledge, to be able finally to distinguish the precise identity of man, things, life, from the image of man, things, and life. And I think he moved in that border region between reality and images, like really like a god. So I will stop there. Thank you. Thanks very much. And thank you so much. I think we're going to have some questions. There's going to be a microphone that goes around. There's a microphone, right? Yeah. So if you want to ask a question, raise your hand. Somebody will pass the mic down to you. I'll tell you a funny story. Something happened to me recently. I went to an event, and the thing ended, and I wanted to ask a question, and I raised my hand, and I felt really nervous. And meanwhile, I'm talking to audiences all the time. I think it's different when you're up here, because, I don't know, maybe the audience is already on your side? And if you're in the audience and you raise your hand, you're like, oh, what are they going to say? But I think everybody's friendly, so feel free. Don't be nervous.
Posso perguntar?
Yes. If you raise your hand, I can see. Okay. Hi.
Olá. Meu nome é Noemi. Eu tenho uma pergunta. Mas ele está ouvindo?
No, Tiago, tell me what you said, if I don't understand. Go ahead. That's fine. Go ahead, ask the question, you translate
Mas
to
eu
me.
posso fazer em inglês, se ele quiser. Não. Faço em inglês? Well, my name is Noemi. I'm a writer, and I'd like to ask you a question. When you were presenting the photograph, the first photographer, I forgot his name.
Rene Buri.
Buri.
Yeah.
You said something that I found very interesting. You said that after you tried to repeat his image, you found out that repeating something makes you understand better what is not in the picture. Didn't you say that?
Yeah.
Right. And so I wanted to, I love this statement, because I'm always interested in learning and understanding what is not in what we see and in what we read.
Yeah.
Right? Trying to write and read what is not there. And when you kind of imitate or are influenced by Giri in those pictures that you've just shown, what did you learn about Giri that is not there? That's what I wanted to ask.
Thank you. Great question. Oh, okay, good. All right. I think part of the point of repetition is that it has to be inexact as a repetition. It cannot be an exact, because you're not in the process of creating a concept. You're learning from a concept. Maybe you're combining it with other things. For me, just simply as a journalist, I like going to places and witnessing for myself so that I understand better what happened. Okay, so maybe repetition is, maybe that might not even be the exact right word, but to be in the place and therefore to understand through it. The American scholar Harold Bloom, his big theory is about the anxiety of influence. His theory of literary creation is that work comes about because there's something edible happening, like Freudian. You try to kill the father, right? You're anxious that this person influenced you, and so you have to overthrow them, and that's how great work happens. And I think he's completely wrong, actually. I think what happens is you consume the ancestors, the mothers and the fathers. You ingest them. You take on the influence. It's not an anxiety of influence, it's a multiplicity of influence. What stymies work, what keeps work confined, is to only have one influence or two. But if you have a multiplicity of influences, then it gives you the possibility of cooking something that is actually unique and brings you to a thing. So when I think about Giri's work, and for me photographically, I have a funny relationship to style because I use many different styles, but when I think of Giri's work, I think of it as an available language. And if the language is there and it can push me into something, then I use it. And then the context in which I present it, I don't say, oh, look, I'm the first person to make a photograph of a mural. No, I'm not. But from my highly subjective point of view, the kind of text that I'm using next to certain kinds of images and a particular kind of rhythm and a particular narrative I'm making with it. There are people who are shot in a particular way, there are people who've put text next to image, but I think I found my own thing through using this. So, you know, what I found with Giri's work is that it's very tied to his topography and his own biography and his own interests. So we have the shared interest of the globe and the map and the encyclopedia and the picture within the picture. But then that's the language. Then what you say with the language is biographical. That's personal. That's you know. Okay, who's next? Was I so eloquent? I answered all the questions, or what happened? All right. Hello. Thank you.
Now, yeah, now it's fine. There are several writers using photography and this dialogue between photography and literature. I think about Sebald, but there are many others. And I would like to ask if before or after you write Open City, if you did shoot New York, and how was it?
Yeah. So I've been doing photography as long as I've been writing. And for sure, there's a tradition of doing prose fictions or even nonfiction and using photos strategically throughout the text. We have in Cortázar, we have it in Sebald, we have it in Ondaatje, who did, you know, Billy the Kid and Coming Through Slaughter well before Sebald's works. We'll also have it in Orhan Pamuk, you know. More recently, people like Caroline Mazzo and Carson sometimes uses this kind of word image thing. There's an established minor literary stream where this is happening. Hardly any of them is a serious photographer. So a lot of them are using found images, or they're using snapshots, okay? Or somebody else's formal pictures, right? So that, like in Istanbul by Pamuk, the photos are all by Ara Güler, who's the great photographer of Istanbul. But for me, I have two practices. I spend more time photographing than I spend writing. And it's been there from the beginning. So my first book, which was published in Nigeria in 2007, and I believe it's going to be published here next year, I think, is text and image. So it's very integrated in my work, and I think that's why it made sense for me to really go deep into photography criticism, because articulating what other photographers are doing helps me to understand what I'm doing in language. It also helps me to understand what I'm doing in photography. So they're equally important. Okay, we're going to take 2 more questions because I need to get out of here and have a glass of wine. Jeez, it's late. Is this age? Am I getting older? I like wine a lot these days.
Wine is nice.
No, I'm not an alcoholic. I mean, I have always drunk wine, but I've really gotten to like the taste of a good glass of red wine. Show of hands, fans of wine. Yeah. So it happens with maturity, I think. Yeah.
Oi.
Yeah.
I'm 24 years old and I like wine.
Oh, wow. They grew up so fast. Okay.
I would like to know, how did you get to know Luigi Giri? like if there is a story behind.
I think I saw the Aperture book when that was published. What year was that? 12? Or 2011? Or no, maybe later. No, maybe 2011. So I saw that, but it was out of the corner of my eye. But I visited Switzerland in 2013, and I saw this postcard. And it just changed something for me, really fundamentally. And then I think for the next 2 years, I didn't even look at anybody else's work. So it was interesting. And then the following year, just by chance, I lived in Switzerland for a while, which is a place where he had lived. He had visited a lot, and a bunch of pictures from Switzerland. And there was a big exhibition there about his work, so I got into it. Yeah. Okay, final question.
I have a question.
All right.
There's a classic definition or distinction between when we talk about photography and painting, that we say that painting is an art of accumulation, that you add to the surface something, and that photography is an art of extraction, that you're always extracting from reality something.
That's right. Uh-huh.
Yeah, so my question was actually, I was wondering if between writing, and if you can make any kind of distinction between writing and photography in your mind, if you think there's a different spirit or something that you invoke or a different set of mind that you have to do to work with these two arts.
That's a brilliant question. You could, I think you'll really go far in the Brazilian photography world, Thiago. It's very, very insightful. If you don't know who this guy is, he's the boss of all that you survey. So, well, I mean, one of the ways to answer that is to also talk about why these two very different photographers I presented here today, I feel so connected to both of them because I think they are both involved in the dream state, in the dream world, in arriving at the image that feels like, wow, how did we get there? How did that happen? And I think that is a process of selection. It's a process of almost shamanistic preparation, but then after the work has been made to be able to select. And this is what writing, for me, has in common with photography. Both emerge out of, I mean, I think precisely when we're dreaming, it's a little bit of intensity, but really it's vulnerability. We're breathing, you're lying down, and then you're allowing something to come. And unless I get into that state, I cannot really write what I need to write. Unless I get into that state, the pictures are banal. And it's especially important to be in that state when you're editing your writing, because out of a lot of noise and loose edges and like messiness, you're going for like a real lucidity and clarity. To make a picture like this, who's been to Capri? It's a very crowded place, you know? So he's taking lots of pictures, he gets into the dark room, he makes his, contact sheet. And then he's in that space, that rhythmic space where he knows that it's this quiet one that makes it work for him. And because I am often looking for a similar kind of dreamlike moment, it is about focus and concentration. So when I went to the zoo on my last visit here, I kept trying to take pictures of the giraffes. It couldn't work. And finally, I took a picture in the cafeteria of a painting of the giraffes, because that picture somehow was cooperating with the shape of the chairs. The mural, the long neck of the giraffes and the long back of the chairs, and then that is what. And I'll close with this thought. You know, for a lot of online writing now and photography, there's an expression we have in the Anglophone world, and you probably have something similar here. Making content, content providers, creating content, which I think is a terrible idea. You know, it makes it sound like the food that is being given to cows, content, like cheap, you know. But you're not creating content. Your job as an artist is to bring into the world something that would not have come into the world unless you brought it in. And that requires to turn yourself into a kind of a conduit where there's all this noise, and then what comes out is, through your receptivity, what you bring out is something hopefully miraculous. Okay, we'll stop there. Thank you very much.